Hello, hello.
Hey, hey.
What's up, everybody? Welcome to another edition of Last Thursday.
Indeed. Welcome, guys. Happy Thursday.
Yes, indeed.
Day of Jupiter.
Yeah.
How's your day coming along, bub?
Pretty good.
Yeah?
Actually. Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah. How about you?
Pretty good.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would say. Overall, no complaints. Been kind of busy, but, that's to be expected these days. We usually have a full schedule.
Yeah, usually do. And that's a good thing, but sometimes it can feel like a lot.
Yeah, totally. But I was looking forward to today because I've been wanting to talk about the Beatles for a little while here.
Yeah, you have. And you've been diving back into this stuff over the past couple of weeks, actually. So
I have.
it's high time we bring it
Totally.
to the summer of love.
That's right. Indeed. And it weaves in really nicely with everything, too.
Yeah, it does.
Yeah, but let's say hello or let's say thanks and give praise to the Patreon people that we have around.
Yeah.
So thank you guys for being part of our journey here and supporting us via Patreon. So that includes Chance, Benna, Sarah, Liam, Amy, Miri, and Hank. I see Hank's in the chat. Jenny G, I see Jenny in the chat as well. Hello.
What's up, Jenny?
Erica, Moonlander, who's also in the chat.
Boom.
Spoons, Mary, Catherine, Logan, Lilivine, Debbie, Natasha, MB, Nausicaa, Stephanie, and Jennifer. Much love, you guys.
Yeah, thank you. And I don't know if you mentioned, but Hank's also hanging around too.
I did say that.
Oh, you did? Okay, sorry.
Yeah.
My apologies.
No worries. It's all good.
He's always on it.
Totally. He is.
You are.
Oh, me. Gotcha.
Yeah.
He is too, though.
No, Hank's always here. And
Here.
Mari's here too. So there she is. Artist Seer. What's up?
Totally. And so if you guys want to support the channel, you can do so at patreon.com/thehealinghome. And let's say hi to the chat real quick. What do you think? Or do you want to get a drink first?
Yeah, we can do a drink and then say hi, or what do you think?
Let's go for it.
I think our order's not always the same, but
No, that's true.
yeah. All right, so we're drinking kombucha, orange, strawberry, and lime.
Homemade kombucha.
Homemade kombucha.
Nice.
This one has a really good fizz to it. So this one's probably on the second ferment, maybe 8 days in.
Okay.
Which is where I like it. I find that's like the sweet spot because I like it really fizzy. So
Nice. All right, let's have a sip, and then I have a question about the kombucha.
Okay. Cheers.
Cheers. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Ho. That's really good.
Mmm.
It actually got better.
For sure. Oh, yeah.
Because I tasted at like day 5, and I was like, not ready yet. And then here we are, day 8.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like right where we like it. So
I feel like I say this all the time.
Oh, yeah.
But honestly, it's like a lot of the things, I'm so spoiled over here, guys. You have no idea. Or maybe you do have an idea if you follow the Healing Home.
I am too, by the way. So we're both spoiled.
We are. But it really, your homemade kombucha makes all other kombuchas available out there almost undrinkable, I would say. Seriously.
It's true. You always, every time I buy one, because I'll buy them at the store or whatever, because I still like certain brands. And then he'll take a sip and be like, meh. Doesn't compare.
It just doesn't. It truly does not. Not even close. So if people have not had homemade stuff, they really should give it a go. So that was going to be my question. If you had one solid piece of advice for people out there who are maybe giving it their first go, what would you say?
That's a great question. My first piece of advice would be, I mean, I would say, gosh, it sounds corny, but just do it. Just try first. But find yourself a good SCOBY. If you have a friend that makes kombucha, ask them for one, or you can make your own SCOBY as well. So you can buy some of your favorite kombucha at the store, preferably like a plain kombucha, and you can brew black tea, add some sugar. You can look up measurements or whatever, and then add that kombucha to the brewed black tea with sugar. You can also use green tea, oolong tea, whatever you like. And then in about 2 weeks, you let that sit on the counter, cover it with some cheesecloth. You'll have your own SCOBY. So I think that the health of the SCOBY is super important. And that would be my first advice, I would say. If I was to only give one.
There you go. Nice. Right
Yeah.
on. Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, it's delicious, so thank you. Cool. So let's say hi to the people in the chat. Before we get started here, Katrina is here.
Howdy,
or
Katrina.
Katrina, however you maybe might say it. Kabir is here.
What's
What's
up,
good,
Kabir?
dude? Jenny G is here.
Hello, Jenny.
As I already mentioned, Flat Earth Hippie Hank is here.
Hey, Hank.
Moonlander, what's up, dude? The
What's
Branch
up,
is here.
Moonlander?
What's up, Joshua?
Hey, Joshua.
Elliot James is here.
Howdy, Elliot.
Isle Shops Lab is here.
Ooh, nice.
Stacy Sunshine.
Hey, Stacy.
Jenny is here. Jenny Zyke. Jenny Z. So Jenny G and Jenny Z in the house.
I like that.
And then we also have Artist Seer Mari.
Hey, Mari.
Hello.
Miri, sorry.
Miri Mari. I think it's all good. John Wills is here. What's up, John?
What's up, John? Good to see you.
Yeah. And then let's see who else might be here. RMA SB
Hey, what's happening?
and Billingtano is here.
Howdy. Good to see you.
Cool. Okay, so yeah, I'm correct. Katrina says it's just like Katrina.
Okay, cool.
That her mom just had to spell it weird. That's pretty funny.
Nice.
Right. So the Beatles. Gotcha. All right. Well, I mean, wow.
Yeah, there's so many. There's so many strings.
That's what I was going to say. The first thing I would like to say about all of this stuff. So first off, if people have seen last Thursday over the last handful of weeks, they know that we're diving into the counterculture aspect of the 60s. We're getting into the Manson narrative. So far, we've talked about the Hells Angels, Manson, Acid,
Process Church.
Process Church.
Which was a really fun one.
Totally. We're definitely going to do a Woodstock episode.
Yep, that's coming.
I could see the Beatles. We'll see where we end up at here, but there's absolutely room for a part 2. I think it also depends on how deep I want to get with it. But it's really interesting when you think about the 60s and you think about the hippie movement and stuff. Obviously, I don't think about the Beatles, but the Beatles were parallel with a lot of the stuff that we've gotten into, including the culture creation aspect of everything. What do you know? But diving into the Beatles, first off, there's like the mainstream history of the Beatles. So it's like you can just be a normie Beatles fan and be consumed with Beatles stuff, trivia, information. You can get really into all their lyrics. You can get into all the little nuances about their career. I'm sure there's plenty of books that are mainstream about the Beatles. There really isn't a greater, larger, more influential sort of musical act out there. Ever.
Yeah, no, I would say that that's a true statement for sure.
The only other person I can think of is Michael Jackson, right?
Yeah.
And so, which has an interesting relationship with the Beatles as well. And there's overlapping stuff going on there. So that's like mainstream Beatles stuff, which, to be honest, too, before we get too deep into anything, I would say I'm not even really that big of a Beatles fan. I am a late bloomer with a lot of things, and it took me many years to actually finally get around to listening to the Beatles. And then when I finally did, this was in my 20s, late 20s, maybe early 30s actually. But when I finally did, I was like, oh, dang, they wrote that song and they wrote that song? Holy cow, I've heard this song my whole life. I had no idea it was a Beatles track, you know? And so they've written so much music, or the Beatles entity has come out with so much music,
Right.
maybe is more accurate to say, that it kind of boggles the mind a little bit, especially with how long they did it in. And that's something that I've emphasized before. I will be talking about that again today, just to kind of drive this point home, because it is one of the more fascinating things that I think, even as a normie sort of fan of the Beatles, it kind of makes you scratch your head, right? It's like a supernatural feat what they did in their career. And so I will say that the sort of hidden aspect of the Beatles the more occulted sort of aspect of who they were. If you're interested in learning, in my opinion, a closer, more accurate narrative of what they were up to and who they were hooked up with and all of these things, I'll just say that it's a huge, huge rabbit hole in and of itself. It's like looking into a subject that has many moving parts, many different aspects to it. So in a way, to me, I don't know why this is the metaphor that's coming up, but it's almost like looking into like World War II or something like that. Where it's just like, okay, well, what aspect of World War II? Are there specific battles? Are there, what year are you talking about? Are you looking at the propaganda? Are you looking at the technological side of things? Are you looking at the political side of things? Are you talking about like specific sort of key players, presidential stuff? Like, it's one of these things where just looking into alternative Beatles information, just kind of dipping my toes back into it, I'm like, wow, there are so many different angles here. You have each individual Beatle, you have their own history, you have their rise to fame, and it seems like every single step along the way with their story, there's something kind of sketchy or weird kind of going on, or at the very least, there's something going on that makes you kind of like scratch your head of like, well, that doesn't make sense, or how could this be, or whatever. And then once you learn some key sort of information about the Beatles, there's just even more to tug at. So by no means am I sort of like an expert at this stuff. It's just been kind of like a passing interest of mine over the last handful of years. And I would say right out the gate too, if you guys are interested in learning more about this, I would say probably the person who's come out with a lot of the sort of cleanest information about it, who is very professional in how they communicate about it and everything else, is Mike Williams. So Mike Williams has a channel, a project called The Sage of Quay. And so Quay is Quay. And as far as, my understanding goes, he's like one of the go-to sort of like alternative Beatles sort of researchers out there. And because he's been talking about the Beatles for so long, and because he's also a musician,
I was going to say,
that's another angle too. It's like literally analyzing the music, analyzing the lyrics. There's artwork, there's occult symbolism, there's all sorts of different threads. So I'm going to hit upon a lot of random things today. But all of the things that I'm saying, I think there's more follow-up research to be done if you want to know the details. So because Mike Williams of the Sage of Quay, because he has put out so much alternative Beatles information, he has collected kind of like a following of fellow researchers, basically. So those people funnel him information. So the whole saga of what the Beatles really were, it's an ongoing thing. This story is not complete yet. So it's not like people have all the answers about every single aspect about what their deal was. But collectively, there has been a lot of information put out there. And Mike Williams has kind of been a person that's collected a lot of it, interviewed some of these people, and then put it out on his channel. So he likes to do these presentations. And he's done a ton of interviews over the years. And so if people really want a better beat on this, I would say look at his stuff first. There are certain things that I think maybe are a bit of a reach or a stretch symbolically. So I can't 100% stand behind everything that he has put out there regarding the Beatles. So as an example, the relationship with Crowley and Thelemic sort of symbolism and them seeding it in their albums and in their photos and all this other type of stuff. There's a lot of different examples that he's put out there that I kind of am not 100% on. I think that there's a possibility that some of this stuff is accurate, but I also think that, every single time somebody does anything with their hands, I don't think it's an Illuminati hand gesture sort of thing. But there are people like that out there who do think that, right?
Right.
So shout out Mike Williams. The other thing I'll say for people who want to do more follow-up research is a book called The Memoirs of Billy Shears. And so the basic deal behind this book is that a book came out. I should have looked up the publishing date. Maybe somebody in the chat can look it up real quick. But this book came out probably, I'm assuming within the last 10 or 15 years, something like that. It's fairly recent. And the book is kind of like an expose on the whole entire Beatles phenomenon, who did what's going on with certain lyrics and certain sort of things, certain events within the Beatles timeline. And my understanding, and everyone else's understanding who has read it, which for the record, I have not read it, but I've listened to a lot of people talk about it. And then we actually have a buddy who did read it, and he said that it seems authentic.
Is this Marshall?
No, Paul.
Oh, Paul. Okay.
So our friend Paul read it. He recommended that I check it out a long time ago because I was interested. And the story or the book is written allegorically in some ways, but it's heavily encoded. So people who are like really into the Beatles apparently will get a lot out of it, because there's lots of things that are brought to light that people who are fans would maybe notice, certain lyrics of songs alluding to different aspects of their real history and stuff like that. Certain aspects of their album artwork and whatever. He brings a lot to light. The main thing that he brings up, though, is probably the biggest Beatles conspiracy that has existed since the 60s. This is so wild. But the whole idea that Paul McCartney was replaced. And the book is supposedly written by the guy who replaced him.
Damn.
And his name is Billy Shears. And he has played more than one role in his day. And so that is fascinating, because the other role that he played, you can actually look up photos of this guy. You can look up music by this guy. And people have done a million different comparisons with their face, with their eyes in particular, and their jawline and their hair and how they play the bass and like all of this stuff. And the conclusion that a lot of Beatles fans who are open to this type of information, the conclusion is that, and I don't know the exact reason why, but for whatever reason, and I think that this is maybe perhaps an ongoing part of the research too, and I think that there's more than one theory, but the main thing is that Paul McCartney, the original Paul McCartney, was replaced in 1966. So up until 1966, you are seeing the original Paul McCartney. And then after 1966, you are seeing the replacement, whose name is Billy Shears. And the other role that this guy played is Vivian Stanshall. And he was in another band, and the band is called the Bozo Dog Doodah Band. How's that for a name, huh?
Great.
And so a lot of things changed after 1966 because of this whole entire situation.
And Billy Shears, is mentioned in Sgt. Pepper, in the song Sgt. Pepper.
Right.
It says something like the one and only Billy Shears.
Yeah. It's a reference to the guy who replaced Paul.
Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. But they say Billy Shears, the one and only Billy Shears, and then it goes into that, and then the whole chorus of Sgt. Pepper. So they're alluding to this. And then you can't forget the whole, the conspiracy, quote unquote, about the Paul is dead thing. When you play I don't remember what album it is, backwards.
Uh-huh.
That was a whole thing. My mom even knew about that.
Right.
So it's like these hidden in plain sight sort of thing always going on. So
yeah, exactly. So this idea that Paul McCartney was replaced is something that goes way, way back. And so it's been part of urban legend for a long time, right? And so it turns out, according to my research and people who are like really, really, really into it, which a lot of these people were hardcore Beatles fanatics, right? Kind of similar to your whole 1960s thing.
Right.
Like you loved these bands, you loved the whole entire aesthetic and like kind of the spirit behind the 60s. And then at some point you realize like, oh, this isn't what I thought it was.
Right.
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 A lot of Beatles fans that are into this, basically a similar sort of thing, almost kind of like it was too good to be true. It was too good to be true that the Beatles could release 12 records in 7 years. That is absolutely wild. And so another aspect of all this research is that there have been studio musicians, which this is so common in Hollywood and in the entertainment industry, right? Is that you use studio musicians, and that your favorite artists, more than likely, if they're really popular, they did not write their own music. So, Beyonce doesn't write her own music.
Right.
A lot of these celebrities, a lot of these huge acts, they're not writing their own music. They're using ghostwriters, and they're using studio musicians. And so we saw that documentary called The Wrecking Crew or something like that.
Yeah, it's called The Wrecking Crew. Yeah.
Right. About these like top tier musicians in Southern California.
Yeah, it's like the 50s and 60s.
Right. And they wrote a ton of stuff for a lot of really well-known bands, and they wrote the hits too.
Oh yeah.
And so when you're seeing Cher or something and they're performing this song, it's like the band that she's performing with didn't necessarily write that music.
Right.
They're just performing the song.
Right.
But
right.
That Hollywood, they realized, the entertainment industry, they realized a long time ago, it makes sense that why would you waste a lot of time, having these bands, various bands, taking up a ton of studio time writing this music, when you can have the cream of the crop write it much faster, and it's going to be higher quality, and they work together all the time.
And a lot of times the musicians in a lot of these bands, the Byrds comes to mind, the Monkees is another one. I'm pretty sure the Supremes was in there as people who were using the Wrecking Crew, or the Wrecking Crew was hired for them. A lot of times these musicians in these bands are mediocre.
Yeah,
when it comes to like being able to play, like maybe they can get by, but they're not like,
or they've got a look.
Yeah, they have a look or something, and that's a whole thing. And so anyway, that's something to keep in mind too, that they're good enough to be able to be on stage and like play it. But to me, it's like it's almost like they're all cover bands in some weird way.
Yeah.
Because and it's not to say that, who knows? It's like, it's not to say that some of them didn't write some of the music or whatever, but that majority of it was written for them. I think that is a pretty safe to say bet. And it's like, you can find this, it's like public record kind of stuff. You just look it up.
That's it.
And it's people, these studio musicians talking about it, like openly.
Yes. Yeah.
And it's out there. So it's not like they're trying to cover it up either.
Oh, yeah, exactly. So there's a drummer. I can't remember his first name, but his last name is Purdy. And he came up with a beat called the Purdy Shuffle. And he was this badass, top-tier studio drummer. And he did stuff for a lot of huge acts. And later on in his life, he was interviewed for some documentary. And he just casually drops, oh, yeah, I did stuff. I did 22 tracks for the Beatles. And I did stuff for this band and that band or whatever. And he's just he's mentioning it casually because it's the real deal. He has absolutely no reason to lie because he is that guy.
Right.
Right. And so people have even done comparisons with the recording quality of, say, the drummer and then the live performance of Ringo. And and people have said that Ringo is, some people, that's like a huge joke is Ringo and his drumming ability and the way he looks and everything else. But people have done the comparison and they're like, there's no way this guy who's performing this live is the same guy that actually performed on the White Album or whatever.
Right.
And people have come across that multiple times, is that the musicianship with the studio recording is much higher than what you actually see the Beatles perform.
Which can happen though.
100%.
With bands that even write their own music and stuff. You see a band live sometime, you're like, oh, okay.
But bands back in the day, that was more of a thing where you had to be able to perform live.
That's true.
Today it's much different. I think today you can get away with being like a studio band,
right?
And then you hear them live and you're like, oh my God, this is like atrocious or whatever.
Right.
Back in the day, you're gonna hear more bands sound similar to their recording.
That's true.
And so people had a different standard, And so anyway, so people have done that kind of work where they're like literally analyzing, the musicianship, and they're seeing huge discrepancies between what this person's playing here and then what's being played live. And I showed you this the other day. There's even there's a video of the Beatles playing in Tokyo, I believe, or somewhere in Japan, I guess. And they played in Japan, and literally the music starts playing, the riff starts playing before any of the guys are even touching their guitar.
Classic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So they were literally using like a recording, so they were just kind of miming the whole entire thing. They're pretending to play, basically. And so it's like, if they were the Beatles, the almighty Beatles, who can write a hit record in 2 weeks and record it and put it out there and everything else,
Right,
then they should be able to perform live. And I'm not saying that they never performed live, but there are occasions where people have footage of them using a recording to get through a performance or whatever. And so my understanding is that the Beatles absolutely are in one way or another. I don't know if the word construct is too strong here, but there was a construct sort of angle to them. So they were created in some way, shape, or form. The show had to go on. That's probably the reason why they replaced Paul McCartney. By the way, after he was replaced in '66, Paul McCartney, the second Paul McCartney, Billy Shears, Vivian Stanchel, he didn't play live in a real life setting until 1973.
Damn, wait, what?
Yeah, so from 1966, apparently, from 1966 to 1973, Paul McCartney did not perform live in like a live setting with like a real audience and stuff like that.
How did they go on tour and stuff?
I don't know if they did. I think a lot of their touring in the late 60s was completely halted.
Oh.
Yeah. And so I think most of their actual touring was before then. And then a lot of the stuff that they were doing, they did music videos and they did performances.
Right, and they would probably go on the Tonight Shows or whatever.
Or they had their, the Magic Mystery Tour movie and like all this other kind of stuff.
Right.
But there is a deliberate sort of thing going on fall. That's another name. People call Billy Shears, Vivian Stanchel, the second Paul McCartney fall. That's just one of the nicknames people have given him. So from the transition from Paul to fall, a lot of things happened. And I think what they were doing is that they were trying to cover up the fact that they had to replace this guy.
Right.
So even the second Paul McCartney, he's taller than the original one. And it's noticeable because when he stands next to George, it's like a big difference. So the original Paul McCartney was shorter. The new Paul McCartney was taller. The original Paul McCartney was actually a better bass player. People have done side-by-side comparisons and whatever versus the second one. There's all sorts of little tiny differences. And the album that the new Paul McCartney came out with, like his like introduction to the world of him trying to just get slipped in or whatever, is during Sgt. Pepper's. And so what are they wearing with Sgt. Pepper's? It's like they're wearing super bright colored clothing, like they're in a band, a marching band or whatever. And the artwork's kind of wacky and all that kind of stuff. And so a lot of people think, and they had longer hair. So they had like facial hair now and all this other stuff. So a lot of people think that the aesthetic of Sgt. Pepper's was to hide the fact that they lost the original Paul McCartney for whatever reason. And so, and that my understanding is that's when they took this touring break. And maybe, I don't know if they toured after that, actually.
Interesting.
So that could be something, worth looking into. But I did hear that, though, that they definitely 100% took a break. And so they probably just didn't want to, give themselves away, basically. And so that's kind of interesting. Okay, so many things to talk about here. We're kind of hitting upon a lot of different things that I did want to mention.
I'm going to grab, I forgot the book that I wanted to talk about.
Okay.
So I'm going to grab that.
I'm going to check the chat and see what's going on. So let's see who is hanging out. Because I see some new names. All right. Just scrolling up here. All right. Oh, interesting. I find it interesting that they demonize John Lennon so much to this day. Let's see here. Beatle alcohol syndrome.
Nice.
All right, so Katrina says, same. I'm not a fan of the Beatles, but fascinated about the conspiracy surrounding them and Lennon and that whole culture machine around them. Yes, culture machine. That's a good way of putting it.
That is a good way of
and
putting it.
And they were, in many ways, kind of like a machine, I would say, too.
And I have a memory of offending like a whole table of friends at one point when they went around the table going, Beatles or Rolling Stones? Beatles or Rolling Stones? And everyone said the Beatles. And I was like, Rolling Stones. And they were like, what? Like, no way. Oh my God. What the hell?
Right.
You know, and I don't even really like the Rolling Stones that much. But personally, I don't know. I liked listening to the Rolling Stones more than I did the Beatles.
Right.
So because I didn't get into the Beatles until I was a little older too. Like in high school, I was listening to all this type of music, but I never really found the Beatles until like later, until I started actually buying vinyl records.
Right.
That's when I got into the Beatles, because then I was buying it on vinyl and I was like, oh, cool. Oh wow, this is really good. And you know, whatever. But anyway,
it's good music. It's just, I feel like my taste in music has been tainted by all of my punk rock, hardcore, and metal. And so the Beatles, there's a few songs I do really enjoy and appreciate.
Yeah, they have some good ones.
It's never been so much my thing, I guess.
Right.
Yeah.
Anyway.
But between Beatles and Rolling Stones, I would even say I'm more of a Beatles guy. So.
Yeah, I mean, it's not a popular opinion, I guess. I just remember, like, I thought of that story when I was, like, thinking of this episode, and I'm like, oh, God. That's funny.
So Isle Shop says, I went from being an everyday fan obsessed with the exoteric Beatles for over a decade to questioning whether they even wrote and performed their own music. Yeah, exactly. Totally. It makes a lot of sense. Again, it's too good to be true. The narrative surrounding them is obviously legendary. And I think that a lot of that's just kind of a fabrication, right? Right. So Katrina says, they do draw a lot of parallels with even modern boy and girl bands, how they are totally manufactured and inorganic in how they come together, for sure. Yep. So Billingtano knows what's up. You can't talk about the Beatles without talking about the Sage of Quay. That's who I was talking about earlier, Mike Williams. He's done a lot of great work with all of this stuff. Okay, so part of it is spelled out in books and about the Tavistock Institute, them and the Stones being two sides of a coin. Yeah, exactly.
Ah, right.
Yeah, for sure. The Tavistock Institute has a part to play in all of this. So let's see here. Okay, what's up, dude? So Moonlander's saying, the Bonzo Dog Doodah Band did the song Death Cab for Cutie. Was that about the death of Paul, a.k.a. the cute one? That's one theory. That's interesting. Yeah.
Interesting.
It could be the case. And so one of the things that I remember hearing, and I don't know if this is the most up-to-date sort of information about this stuff, was that he actually got into a car crash.
Yeah, I remember that story.
So
that
what I'm unaware of, and if you guys know, but what I'm unaware of is, did he get murdered or whacked for whatever reason, or did he just happen to die? Was this just like an organic sort of thing that kind of happened? Is Paul McCartney's death, and then they had to scramble to keep everything going because there was some sort of agenda behind it and everything else. I believe one of the versions of the story I heard was that he was driving home from practice or recording or something, and it was raining, and he saw a girl trying to hitch a ride in the rain in England. And he actually pulled over to pick her up. And then she realized that she was driving with Paul McCartney. And of course, she kind of lost it. And then that's what caused them to get into an accident.
Oh, whoa.
And
if that's real, that's kind of crazy.
That's one version of the story.
He invited it in, kind of thing.
He let it in, and it took everything.
Yeah.
Yeah, totally. That's another thing I'll say real quick, just because it's reminding me of it. But it's been said that the girls who went completely nuts for the Beatles, some of them were hired. That some of their earlier performances in England, where they really were getting a pop from the crowd and stuff, that some of those girls were actually there for hire.
Right.
To go completely ballistic. And that footage is still shown today of
Oh,
girls
yeah.
crying and just going completely nuts for the Beatles. And so to me, that's kind of an interesting thing, that's a possibility, you know. And then regarding the Bonzo band, that guy, Vivian Stanshall, who is like the singer for that band, who became Paul McCartney, who is Billy Shears, he actually is the only outside performer, like known performer, who's like given a credit and everything, in their Magical Mystery Tour movie. So Billy Shears, Vivian Stanshall appears in the Magic Mystery Tour movie, and he does this little shuffle dance sort of thing, and Paul McCartney does the exact same thing. And so it's possible that they were literally showing this guy, Billy Shears, in two different roles. That's what it appears like, that they're showing this guy in two different roles. They're showing his previous role as Vivian Stanshall, and then they're showing him as Paul McCartney as well. Actually, I wonder what year that came out. Do you have any idea when that came out?
I don't know. Sergeant Pepper or the Mystery Tour?
The Mystery Tour.
I'm pretty sure is that the same album?
I don't know.
See, I don't know either.
Maybe if somebody has a beat
Magical
on
Mystery Tour.
If the Magic Mystery Tour stuff came out pre or post 66. Again, it's kind of hard to keep track of a little bit. 12 records in 7 years.
Yeah.
That's like incredible.
Right.
And so that's the thing that I was kind of geeking out about leading up until today, is when you look at some of the earliest Beatles footage, which is like 62, 63, 64, like 63 and 64, they were still wearing the skinny pants and skinny ties and the mop top thing, and the footage is black and white and they're upright. And they were known for being clean cut. That was like one of the things that they were kind of known for. Apparently, I mean, that's a fabrication too. Not apparently. That's a fabrication as well. They did not dress like that up until that point. You know, they had way more of like a rock and roll sort of thing of the era, leather jackets and stuff like that. And then they got this kind of makeover, and so they became the Fab Four and everything. You flash forward 6 or 7 years, and they're playing Let It Be songs on that rooftop.
Right.
And they're wearing like fur coats and stuff, and they have long hair and mustaches, and they look kind of like, you know, it looks like the transition from the 60s to the 70s.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, it's almost like urban hippies or something like that.
Right.
And then so in between then, they had this whole transition, and they had different phases of their career arc and everything else. And it's just like, I don't know. I think I said this already once before, but it's like, think about 7 years ago. How much did you change in 7 years? How much has happened in 7 years? When you look at the Beatles, it literally goes from this black and white thing to this like Technicolor thing to this more like urbanized sort of, not grungy sort of thing, but it's more of like it kind of looks almost like blue collar-y or something like that. Mm-hmm. And so they changed that much over the course of 7 years. That's wild to think about. So to me, if they're the biggest thing ever at that time, it's like culture changed arguably culture changed that much too in those 7 years. I don't know. We weren't around. But look at what they looked like early on. Look at what they looked like later on. And you would think in your mind, just looking at some of these photos, the comparison, even the style of music that they were playing, very, very different. Hold My Hand, this and that, Let's Fall in Love, blah, blah, blah.
Right.
To like way more psychedelic, kind of meaningful, kind of more mature sort of stuff. Not as like heavy-handed, you know, in a way. The metaphors, I think, are kind of more complex and stuff like that too, and all of that. It's like in 7 years' time, that to me is kind of amazing.
Well, to me, it just speaks more to the culture creation, because that is what Hollywood and stardom does. They guide the masses into what they are going to dress like, what they're going to listen to, what they're going to be interested in, how things are going to sound and look. So to me, it just kind of like further demonstrates that they are part of the, you know, part of that whole culture creation aspect of these decades, of all of the 60s into the 70s.
Right.
You know? Right. And so that's what I think of.
Yeah, no, exactly. And how fast it moves too, and how fast they want culture to move too. I think that's part of the program.
Yeah.
Where it's like culture moves so fast that in order to kind of keep up with it, you need to be constantly engaged. You need to constantly know who's doing what, and you're going to be part of a kind of like this daily sort of cycle kind of thing. So there's this quickening sort of thing, I think. And there's a name for it. It's totally escaping me. There was a book, and it was talking about this whole entire dynamic. And it was about how the 24-hour news cycle is intended to move so fast fast enough to make your head spin, so that you just don't even know what's going on in the world. That it's actually by design. And so look at the world we live in now. Look how fast everything moves. 7 years, nowadays, that's like whatever happened 7 years ago to younger people, obviously, and to a lot of people who are really plugged in. It's like it might as well be ancient history,
right?
Sort of thing. You know what I mean? And so, anyway,
the other thing that comes to mind is, them having this almost like untouchable thing about them, and so I'm assuming the argument a fan would make is, well, they're such magnificent musicians that they could do all that in 7 years. And I just don't think that that's a very sound argument, really, because when you think about it, even like the White Album, supposedly they wrote the White Album 30 songs in 2 weeks while they were in India when they had their stint in the ashram. And that album was very different for the time. Like, it was more edgy. It was just very striking in terms of what other types of musics were coming out. So to think like, and then the story is that they only had an acoustic guitar to do everything on. But that's when they started to incorporate, the sitar and things like that.
Right.
So there's more of the Eastern vibe to it. But I'm just like, dudes, I don't buy it. You wrote all those 30 songs in 2 weeks? No way.
I don't see that either.
I don't see it. And putting all that together, and the way that album is too, it's just the clippings and the mashing up of sounds and what have you, the mixing that was involved.
I'll just say their albums are very sophisticated.
Oh yeah.
The songwriting is very sophisticated. The musicianship is very sophisticated. What they're able to accomplish with the instruments that they have, it's complex stuff. And so that adds to their allure. And the songs are very, very catchy, obviously, incredibly well written, because you're dealing with world-class musicians, And so just more to the point of, I don't think that they wrote this in 2 weeks, And that seems to be the thing. And then also, too, if this is the greatest band of all time, why would you only give the greatest band of all time 2 weeks to write an album?
Yeah, that's a good point.
Wouldn't you think that towards the end of their career, if they're killing it, that they would even have more flexibility and more leeway to... we didn't finish the comments.
Well, yeah.
So don't you think, though, that you would have... they would want them... You're good. To have all of the time that they need to write the best music that they can. I understand record labels...
yeah, of course.
Yeah, I understand record labels have to, like...
There's deadlines or whatever, you know, but you would give a band, I'm assuming, hey, at the end of 2023, you have to have a record done, or 6 months, or whatever their deals are.
Right.
Sure, they range from all different things, but yeah. And why would you, while they're in India, The
other thing people have pointed out, Mike Williams included, is that when you look at the timeline of some of the albums, it's an impossible timeline because of the manufacturing of the record, of the vinyl, and then the stickers that need to have the lyrics or the song titles on them, and then literally the actual packaging itself with the lyrics and stuff like that. He was saying that when you really look into the timelines for the releases, it doesn't make sense. Some of the releases, not the mainstream history, does not make sense. They want you to think that they just like came in and banged out this incredible, amazing record, and then they just got it out or whatever. And he's like, it doesn't add up.
Right.
There's stuff that does not add up. Because this is a sophisticated machine. There's an agenda behind this. There's a culture creation aspect behind what's going on. The term I was trying to remember earlier, it's future shock. And so it's just, you constantly introduce things so fast to the masses that, again, they don't even know what's what or what's real or whatever. They're kind of stunted, actually, because there's so much happening that you cannot keep up with. And so that technique is called future shock. So to me, the Beatles kind of play into this whole entire thing with how much they advanced. And even too, like how aggressive some of their music got, like Helter Skelter.
Yeah.
You know, for a song of that era, that's a pretty aggressive song.
Yeah.
You know, and so it's just like you're introducing that kind of aggression to a lot of people that have never heard stuff like that, which I don't even think anything sounded like that when they came out with it.
No, and I think that's why it was so striking. And to this day, I'll say that is one of my favorite songs of theirs.
Yeah, it's a good one.
And it's like, I can imagine hearing that if you were to hear that for the first time and you were just coming off of, I don't know, Incense and Peppermint or something like that, you know, or something more docile from the 60s.
Yeah, more tame. Yeah.
Over than to that, because 68, you know, you're still you're coming in towards the end of the era, obviously, or the decade, sorry, but it was still pretty more on the like acoustic-y side. You had bands like MC5 and stuff, and there was experimental rock that was going on that was edging, you know, that kind of stuff. But yeah, I think that the White Album ushered in a harder rock into music in general.
Right.
Mainstream music in general. I think that's one of the roles of the White Album, what that was.
Totally.
Yeah.
Okay, so I have a thought that I want to get to right now, but I'm going to finish the comments and then we'll get back to it, okay?
Okay, sounds good.
Cool. Alrighty. Right, yeah, there's so many examples of this. Members of the Byrds can even play music when the band formed because their military dads got them the position. Yeah.
Yeah, that's freaking true.
I have not, Jenny G. She's asking, have you guys seen Under the Silver Lake? No, that is new to me. She
No.
says it's a drum icon. About a drum icon, I'm assuming.
Okay.
Okay, so Polly Mathing is saying, I've heard a rumor that the Beatles' main ghostwriter was an expert in Celtic and Euro folk music and ripped a ton of those melodies. Oh, interesting. Maybe. Yeah, who knows? I'm assuming they probably worked with a number of musical experts. Maybe there is one main one behind the scenes, though. So let's see here. All right.
Milli Vanilli, yep.
Yeah, right.
My God. Girl, you know it's
Yeah.
true. The hell? I still remember like hearing that or seeing it on MTV and being like perplexed or like, what is going on here?
Hey, yeah, that's a good one. If they were real musicians, why would they be mucking around in those corny movies like they did?
That's a good question, actually. They wouldn't need to do those movies. They would just
Right.
continue to make bomb-ass music.
Yeah, this is a good point, Moonlander. Tattoo Dave. He's saying compare pics of Vivian Stanshall and Paul's son James. Exactly. This is a good one. So Vivian Stanshall, Paul, Billy Shears, Fall, right? His son, dude, looks like Vivian Stanshall.
Really?
His son looks more like what Vivian Stanshall used to look like when he was just being himself, I guess, or he was playing that role, than Paul McCartney. So you could tell just the DNA. It's like the fatherly resemblance is with the guy who replaced Paul McCartney, not with Paul McCartney.
Wow.
Because Vivian Stanshall.
Damn.
Yeah. He's you know, there's
What a mind fuck for that kid, too.
I know, yeah.
Jeez.
There's enough similarities where you can tell that they did a switcheroo. And one of the things we're talking about is a prosthetic eye. Is that Paul actually has, Fall has a lazy eye. And so it's kind of crooked. So they're not always looking in the same direction. Vivian Stanshall, Billy Shears, also has the same thing. He has a prosthetic eye. The original Paul did not have that. Both of his eyes were straight on. You know, and then in Come Together, they talk about a juju eyeball. You know, and so some people think the juju eyeball has to do with this prosthetic eye.
Yeah.
So there's a few really interesting tells. There's a few really interesting comparisons. This is a good one, though, for sure. I just came across that as well. Yeah, exactly. Fall sucks. Paul was a way better bass player. That's my understanding as well. All right. Yeah, I mean, apparently there's songs that are straight up just about this. I have not done that deep dive of lyrical content yet, but Jashin is saying that the Beatles, A Day in the Life, is that they're telling you about Paul's death.
Huh.
Oh, interesting. Okay, so I think it's all BS. There's a video on YouTube about McCartney's childhood home, and you can tell it's the original Paul. It's from 2011. Yeah, perhaps I haven't seen that. To me, it seems like there was a switcheroo at some point.
Matt, you think it's bullshit that he was switched out? Is that what you're saying?
I think so.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
Yeah. Let's see here. Yeah, that's what I was just saying. Josh, and Billy Shears has a dead right eye. You can see it in the new fake Paul, aka Shears. Yeah, exactly. So that's awesome that a lot of you guys are familiar with this. So Katrina's just saying, if Paul did just die by accident, it seems like they were ready and waiting with a double. So it makes me wonder if when they formulate these bands / actors, do they have backups ready made and waiting? Perhaps. Yes, Tavistock construct. That's what I'm thinking for sure. That's what the evidence kind of suggests. Oh, okay, right. So Dave is just saying, supposedly the Beatles had stand-ins during some of their live shows, and Billy may have already been one for Paul.
Aha.
Okay, Slick's hitting on some stuff that I want to talk about regarding Beatle symbolism.
What's up, Slick?
What's up, dude? Okay, some of this might be too much for me to read. Sometimes with Slick's decodes with his comments, I get all jumbled up just trying to read them, but there you go. If you're interested.
Face down low as scribes are devoutly planted in text. Devoutly. Face down, ass up. The clouds, Socrates.
Thinkery. All right, so I do want to talk about this, though, the Beatle aspect.
Yeah, that's a good one.
All right, so let me just finish these comments real quick, if I can. Right. RMA saying, Future Shock definitely has the potential to keep people in fight, flight, or freeze, and thus easier to manipulate and control, 100%.
Yep.
And you just look at how fast things move today. It's the same sort of thing. It's like a lot of people they kind of just throw their hands up of like, I don't know, what am I supposed to do about it? And
right.
Then it's on to the next thing, and then on to the next thing, and on to the next thing. You know, the 24-hour news cycle. It's always introducing something new into the mix. Oh, interesting. Okay, so Slick is saying that Tavistock is a hyper-literal anagram for the actual sound of gas lighting.
Ha. Huh. What's up, Cheney?
Hey, Cheney.
Good to see ya.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so Cheney's saying, she always has good info with this kind of stuff. George Harrison was a child when he started touring with the band.
Huh.
Diamonds is saying John Lennon was an occultist and a Kabbalist. That's the other thing, is that they were trained in the Kabbalah and like black magical stuff, and that they were able to do their own sort of magic because they knew, you know, how to do it.
Right.
They knew some of the basic techniques, maybe some of the sophisticated techniques. I can't believe I forgot to mention already, but Crowley is in the Sgt. Pepper's album cover.
Right.
You know, he's back there. I'm sure most of you guys probably are aware of that as well. All right. Oh, okay. So interesting. Cheney saying she has a theory. I bet you do. I have a theory. The British invasion couldn't have happened in America unless they removed Elvis. Elvis is shamed for being pro-Negro and anti-vax. Make Elvis poster boy, or the vax poster boy. Here come the Beatles. Interesting. Okay.
Huh.
Elvis goes to Germany, comes back with a child bride. The Beatles take over the walk in from pop to psychedelic. Here comes the Laurel Canyon. There's such an interesting German connection here with everything.
Yeah.
That I don't know all of the details, but you're hitting upon an interesting thread, because the Beatles, they apparently got really good when they started playing Germany a lot. And that apparently they weren't doing very well in England And I don't know who came up with this idea, but they went to Germany and they started playing all of these seedy clubs, and they were exposed to like drugs and their red light district with prostitution and all that kind of stuff. And so they're playing all of these shows, and it was in Germany that they really developed their chops, apparently. And apparently what's said, at least with the little documentary that I saw about it, that they actually adopted German sensibilities with their aesthetics, and they apparently were all fluent in German as well, and that they would talk to each other in German when they were in England and on tour and stuff like that. And then they came back to England, and apparently they were like the bee's knees then. So then they knew how to like work the crowd. They knew what people wanted to see. They were way more interesting to look at, and they held people's attention, and their performance sort of abilities and stuff like that apparently got to be next level after they came back from Germany. So to me, whenever Germany comes up as just kind of like a thing, I mean, you just kind of have to take note because there's so much interesting stuff going on there. So that's one angle with what I've heard that, I don't know, some people's ears would perk up at that, I would think.
Oh yeah, definitely.
So what's up with all of that? Is there more than meets the eye with that? Did they go to Germany for multiple reasons, or is it simply were they just playing shows and clubs? All right. Oh, interesting. Lennon and Yoko were heroin junkies pretending they were on a hunger strike.
Yeah, pretty much. That makes sense.
Okay. All right. Awesome. Nice. Good stuff, guys. So the thing I wanted to bring up is the beetle and just beetle symbolism. And so I made a video a couple years ago, and I go through the different animals or creatures that cancer has been connected to. And so we think of cancer today as just being connected to the crab, right? And so that wasn't always the case. So some cultures saw, instead of a crab, they saw a turtle, sometimes a sea turtle. Other groups saw a crawfish or crayfish is a common one. A lobster is also a common one as well. And I think one of my favorites is the beetle from ancient Egypt. And so apparently cancer was the beetle or scarab beetle in ancient Egypt. And so what I said in that video is that it's interesting that cancer, of all of the 12 signs, that constellation is like hardest to see in the sky. It's very, very dim. The stars are very faint. And so I think that kind of lended itself to kind of having multiple interpretations over the ages. I would say the only other sign that has like a lot of substitute creatures is Scorpio. So Scorpio is the scorpion, but it's also the serpent, but it's also the eagle, and it's also the phoenix as well. And so Scorpio has a number of creatures associated with it. But Cancer, to me, I think maybe might have the most animals associated with it. And we were talking to Slick last night, but also the unicorn, I think, is another example of a Cancerian sort of creature. And so that's really interesting that the Cancer constellation and its animal has changed so much over time.
And so have the Beatles.
And so have the Beatles. Exactly.
Right.
And so to me, I'm like, is this what is kind of being alluded to here? The future shock thing?
Right.
This constant change, this constant sort of reinvention, or this constant rebirth, because birthing symbolism also is related to Cancer.
Yeah.
And it's very feminine, right? It's lunar. So I think of mother, and I think of all of these different things. And so so that's intriguing. And then also when the Beatles first came out, they were known for their mop tops, right? And so it's kind of like you almost like have like a helmet head sort of thing, right? It's like, well, what do all of the main creatures that are associated with Cancer have? They all have shells. They all have this hard exterior. They have an exoskeleton. They have a kind of I don't know, it kind of reminds me of a helmet or something like that, right?
Right.
And so whether you're talking about a tortoise, right, a sea turtle, or you're talking about a beetle, or you're talking about a crab, they all kind of have this sort of thing going on, right? This protective sort of layer. And so that kind of sounds like a stretch. But the kicker for me is that the card that's associated with Cancer is the Chariot card, okay, in the Major Arcana. It's the 7th card of the Major Arcana. And so you have the Charioteer generally in the middle of the chariot, and he's surrounded by 4 posts. And so these are like the 4 pillars of heaven that hold up the vault of heaven. And so it's interesting to me that with the Beatles, we're dealing with the Fab 4, right? And so to me, I haven't done this work yet, but I bet if you really look into the personality types of the Beatles, my guess would be that each one of them corresponds with one of the 4 elements. And that's partly what the 4 posts represent too. They represent the 4 elements, the 4 fixed signs, which each corresponds with an element. And so I've always looked at it like the charioteer is the 5th element. He's associated with spirit or ether. So he's kind of like the 5th point in like a cross, as an example. So the cross has a relationship to the number 4 quadrants, 4 arms, but then you have that middle point that where the 2 arms cross each other. That would be the 5th point, the center point. And so the 5th thing is always considered to be what's actually in control. And so our head would be like the 5th main appendage on our body, right? Controlling the 2 arms and the 2 legs, as an example. And so there's other ways of showing this. So there's like illustrations and like statues and stuff of like an emperor in a chariot being pulled by 4 horses, right? And so these 4 horses represent the 4 elements, and he represents the 5th element. So he represents the thing that's actually in control of the 4 other elements, right? So you have the beetle, very much related to Cancer. You've got the card, the chariot card, having these 4 posts. It's not uncommon to see the charioteer, by the way, like in the Crowley version of the deck. There's 4 statues in front of the chariot itself, right? So the Fab 4, you know, and I'm inclined to think that they probably each correspond with an element of some kind. And then to me, the trippy thing about it that I think is really fascinating is the fact that the charioteer in the Rider-Waite version, he has a white square on his chest.
Oh, right. Like the White Album.
It looks exactly like the White Album.
Right.
Which is a bold move. I remember the first time I ever saw the White Album, and it's like pure white, but I think they have like a little indentation of the Beatles.
Yeah.
But it's predominantly white. It's called the White Album, right?
Right.
And so it's a white square, basically.
Yeah.
And so when I was thinking about all this stuff, and then I was thinking about the constant evolution, which is a constant turning, which is a constant revolution, which is like the turning of the chariot wheel as well. And that's what the charioteer also represents too. He has that North Star on top of his head. So he is the hub of the wheel. He is in the middle of the wheel of heaven that's turning, you know? And so when I think of the Beatles, I just think of this constant evolution and that they never stopped. And it's funny too that their career, when I looked it up, I'm pretty sure from album to album, it's 7 years. So 7 kind of correlating to the chariot card as well. And then 12 albums over 7 years. It just reminds me of kind of the 12 signs of the Zodiac or whatever. But anyway, so it makes me wonder if this stuff is at all
related,
connected in some way, shape, or form.
I mean, there's quite a few connections there that are pretty profound, I would say.
I think so.
And I remember when you first kind of started putting that together. That was a couple of years ago.
Yeah. Exactly.
I think it's worth digging, or I think it's worth thinking about, you know, because we know that they have reasons for doing what they do.
Right.
You know, there's no randomness to them creating this band, and there's probably there is a lot of power behind them, which is one of the reasons why I think that they were just put in this position and made so good, you know, because pretty much everybody knows one Beatles song.
Oh yeah, well yeah, and
You
even if
know.
you don't know that, you know at least one.
Right, you've heard
You probably
it.
still do. Yeah.
You've totally heard it. So, one of the things that I think about too and want to get into is Jimmy Savile. I mean, he was our thumbnail with the Beatles.
Yeah.
So, there's that photo of the Beatles with Jimmy Savile. And it's like, why are they with him?
Yeah, I know, right?
What's going on here? And then Jimmy Savile being knighted, and he was a big deal in England.
Right.
And if I'm not mistaken, Paul McCartney is also knighted. Is that correct?
Yeah, and I have something to say about that.
And he is Sir Paul McCartney.
Right.
So not just anybody gets that title.
Right. Right. So just real quick, because we'll talk about Jimmy Savile.
Yeah.
But the idea of a fifth Beatle, there's been a few people who've been called the fifth Beatle, which would be like the controller or handler, like I was kind of explaining.
Okay.
Someone mentioned George Martin, and he's considered to be one of the fifth Beatles. And so he was their producer. And so he was kind of like the guy, the go-between, I think.
Okay.
Between the studio musicians, probably Tavistock and stuff like that, and then the Beatles themselves and everything else. So this idea of a fifth Beatle being actually in control is kind of interesting. But my understanding is there's actually a few people who have gotten or have received that title,
Okay.
So anyway, so there's that. But yeah, Jimmy Savile. So we just talked about him last week.
Yeah, with the process.
With the process, yeah. Can someone confirm that he was knighted? I want to know because I think I saw him with. There's like you receive some sort of like
a medal.
Yeah, you receive a medal.
Yeah.
And so we just talked about him because he was in the Process Church. A Final Judgment. He was interviewed by them, and he was in one of their zines.
Yeah.
And we had a book that was a reproduction of some of these zines. You're starting to light up a little bit because we're talking about the Process Church.
Oh my God, it's sick. Really.
True or
it's
not
sick.
true?
True.
And there's this crazy photo of Jimmy Savile in there. And this was way before people knew that he was a hardcore pedophile and stuff like that. Bug-eyed as always, and looking super sinister. And I said this last week, but I'll never forget reading that interview for the first time. And the first question is, are you moral? And this is back in the 60s. And he says, I'm basically moral by day, but not by night. That's when the real wolves come out.
Right.
And so he was admitting guilt to being, at the very least, immoral. But that obviously no real claims attached to that or anything else.
Right.
But when you look years later at what he was up to and all that kind of stuff, it takes on a new meaning. So when I saw some recent photos of the Beatles with Jimmy Savile, I was like, oh my God. I mean, I'm not surprised in a way.
Right.
And he was a known personality.
Yeah, he was quite famous.
Yeah, he was super famous. So it would make sense that he would be at the very least friendly with them or had met them multiple times.
Yeah.
Or whatever.
Ran in the same circles, was on the same show or,
Right.
something like that.
Right. So, but there's one photo of him, and dude, he looks so creepy. And he's kind of doing this like evil sort of like gesture, posture.
Did you
sort of
put
thing.
those together or you didn't have time? Weren't you going to have slides
I
or
didn't-
something?
I didn't have
okay.
time. Yeah.
Because that photo is quite gross.
It's sickening. It's like he's like acknowledging who he actually is.
And he's with the Beatles again.
Yeah. By the way, I know we're like into the stream over an hour or whatever, but if people have thoughts that they want to share through voicemail, they can leave a voicemail on our Telegram.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we'll check that at the end to see if anyone has left anything.
Totally.
But yeah, so they probably met like everybody.
Oh, I'm assuming. Everybody wanted to probably meet them.
Right.
That's kind of the caliber that they were.
Right.
So
yeah,
it
exactly.
would make sense.
Well, related to this actually is the whole idea of children and the Pied Piper.
Oh, right.
So I recently, because of Mike Williams and looking into Beatles information, he relayed the story of the Pied Piper. I kind of knew vaguely what the Pied Piper story is all about, the mythology. And then he was saying that it appears as though the Beatles maybe have been alluding, especially in Sgt. Pepper's, that they are the Pied Pipers. And so the story goes is that there's a small village in Germany once again, kind of interesting. I think it's like 1284 or something like that. That's the year. And this town was overran by rats. It was a huge problem. This Pied Piper comes to town, and he's wearing multicolored clothing. And he says that he can get rid of the rats for the town. And so they agree to some sort of fee for him to get rid of the rats. And so they agreed to it. They shook hands, whatever. He started playing his flute through the town, and he was playing a song that the rats couldn't, or sorry, he was playing a song that the humans couldn't hear. The villagers could not hear it, but the rats could hear it. And so he's playing his flute through town, and all of the rats started following him out of town. And he led them. There's multiple variations, but the ones I heard were he either leads them to drown in a river, or he leads them to a mountain outside of town to kind of like disappear into the mountain forever, to never be seen again, into a cave. And so he comes back to the village and asks for payment. And they said, oh, well, if we knew it was going to be that easy for you, we wouldn't have agreed to such a high sum. And so they actually backed out of the deal. And so what he did was he pulled out his flute, started playing a song, and all of the children from the village started following him, just like how the rats were following him. And apparently the story goes is that it's always 130 children. That's one of the things that is always baked into or encoded in this storyline is 130 children. And so he does the same thing. He takes them out of town, but I think this version with the children is he always takes them to the mountain, and he takes them into a cave within the mountain, and then they're never seen again. Yeah. And this is what happens when you don't pay the Pied Piper. So apparently, again, the Pied thing is like different colored clothing, different types of clothes. And he was a traveler, so nobody had ever met this guy. So personally, to me, I think he's very, very, very mercurial. And so there's versions of Mercury, Hermes. He's playing a flute. I've been saying forever that Hermes is associated with the phallus, with the pole, with the world axis, with the tree, all of these different types of things. And the multicolored nature of his clothing, the pied clothing, also to me is mercurial. Mercury goes to and fro. And so he's a colorful person. He's a shapeshifter. And so he wears many different masks. He's androgynous, so he's both feminine and masculine. The multicolored nature of the Pied Piper, to me, alludes to the mercurial way, which is being here and then being there. Being mercurial means that you're kind of a shapeshifty person too,
right?
So there's many sides to you, right? So to me, the multicolored thing feels very mercurial to me. The fact that he's an out-of-towner, he's a traveler, obviously that's Mercury stuff all day, basically. And then even the musical aspect of it and the flute itself, right? That's just what I see. And there's a lot of symbolism too, with Mercury also being related to the good shepherd, the shepherd that leads his flock, right? Because Mercury is a psychopomp, so he's a guide of souls. So he goes from this domain to the great beyond, to the underworld, right? And so he has an awareness of things that normal people don't have, because we're not traveling like that. We're not going to travel like that until we cross over. And when we cross over, we're going to want, this is the old idea at least, you want a guide.
Right.
You're going to want someone who knows their way around to show you the way. And that's what Mercury is. He shows you that way to this other place, right? And so there's even versions of Mercury where he's holding like a sheep, or he's holding like a ram over his shoulders. And so kind of being like the leader of a pack, or kind of being the leader of like a parade, I see symbolism that's very much connected to Mercury and also very much connected to Aries as well, because Aries is like the celestial host. And so he's the beginning of the year. So he's kind of like that raw, fiery energy that can propel the group forward. So he can take charge, right? Aries is related to the head. And so the symbolism between Aries and Mercury are many. And so that's kind of what I see, is that it's a mercurial sort of thing. And Mercury also relates to the Chariot card. I think he relates to so many different things. So it sounds like it almost sounds like a stretch to associate him with so many different things. But once you know his ways, you realize that that's his deal. That he's almost like I wouldn't say he's like a catch-all sort of thing, but he's very he's a traveler. So he goes above and below and here and there, and he's feminine and masculine, so he understands both sides. You know, he's very malleable and very flexible that way. So Mercury, sometimes the glyph for Mercury is actually on the chariot itself. So like Barbara Walker's chariot card, there's literally a Mercury glyph on the chariot. And to me, that's beautiful symbolism because it's completely related. So travel symbolism, whether it's the chariot or the horse or the boat or whatever, very, very mercurial, I would say. And so what people have said is that the Beatles, that they are the Pied Piper taking your children away from your village.
Wow.
And that is kind of the symbolism that kind of resonates and makes sense. So in Sgt. Pepper's, they're all wearing kind of the band clothing, and it's all multicolored. I mean, they're all wearing like by themselves uniform colors. But when they come together, it's like someone's blue and someone's, you know, pink or whatever, and someone's yellow or whatever. And so this multicolored sort of thing definitely comes out. And they're like the leaders of the pack. They're leading culture. They're leading your children into this new sort of frontier, you know, musically, aesthetically, culturally, all this kind of stuff.
Right.
And so to me, the metaphor definitely makes sense of like this guy from out of town who knows music or it can entertain people or whatever, has a thing, suddenly now captures the attention of all your children, and now all of your children have been taken away from you. And now they're under this trance. They're under this spell, right? And so to me, the metaphor does kind of apply.
Which was the theme for the 60s, too, as we've talked about before.
And so Billy Shears is also a reference to cattle and like shearing a
sheep.
A sheep, yeah, exactly. And so there's lots of shepherd symbolism baked into all of this stuff, with Paul McCartney kind of being a shepherd. And there's like photos of him and he's holding like a shepherd's crook and stuff like that. I think he has like solo records that kind of get into some of this stuff.
Okay.
And so the shepherd leading their flock is very similar to the person at the front of a parade, which is kind of similar to, you know, the band leading the parade as well.
Right.
The marching band, right? And so even March, right? March, that's the time of Aries. Right? What do soldiers do? March. Aries is ruled by Mars. You know, there's like a million different sort of things going on there symbolically with Aries, war, marching, leading the way, Christ symbolism too, and all of that. He was crucified and resurrected during Aries season, blah, blah, blah. It kind of goes on and on and on. But that's one of the deep encodes that people have kind of figured out.
That's a good one.
Is that Paul McCartney is in some way, shape, or form kind of a shepherd herder, and that the Beatles are kind of like shepherd herder Pied Pipers.
Makes sense to me.
Yeah.
I mean, really, with everything else.
And that's always the thing. It's like you put people out there and you want them to have all the shine and all the glory, and they are amazing and they can write these incredible albums in 2 weeks' time. So follow their lead.
Right, exactly.
You know, you can be great too, just like the Beatles. All you have to do is just try or whatever.
Yeah,
I think that's what a lot of people, they look up to these celebrities, they look up to these musicians or whatever, and they're trying to find somebody that they can kind of believe in. They're trying to find somebody, I think, that is excelling in life. And I think the subconscious thing is that they want to excel. So they think by following this person that they might learn something that they can use to their advantage so that they too can become leaders, or that they too can excel with whatever. I think that's always the subconscious sort of thing, you know? So somebody sees Arnold Schwarzenegger, you know, and he's all jacked and stuff. And it's like, yeah, you might like his personality or his movies or think he, like, you know, looks incredible or whatever. But I think subconsciously you're trying to learn something from him. It's like you found the alpha male, or you found your father figure symbolically that you think you can learn a thing or two from.
Right. Well, and one of the things that kind of goes along with this, and that I've been thinking about throughout the episode, is just, you know, being a fan or being fanatical about something. and how that plays into all this stuff. And I think there's also that goes into like the Messiah complex kind of thing and all of that. And I'm not saying that you shouldn't look up to people or have people that inspire you or whatever. I mean,
you inspire me.
Thank you.
As an example. Is that wrong? No. If it is, I don't want to be right.
Good one. That's a good one.
Anyways, as you were saying.
So, but that's what I think of, especially with the Beatles, is the fanaticism. And then with how they presented these girls just going nuts and like convulsing and everything else. I think like that was part of their program. And Elvis is in that same boat.
Right.
With the fanaticism and just you worship these people and they can never do any wrong and oh my God, and you buy everything of theirs and you collect it all and everything else. And we've talked about this, in our own conversations, but the whole thing with collections.
Oh, yeah.
And hey, we've got hella books, you've got tarot decks, so it's not that we're exempt from collecting things or whatever.
Right.
So totally get it. But I think like there is some sort of void filling that goes on.
Yeah, absolutely.
To feel as though you have to have these massive collections of things to prove something, or I don't know. It's really strange, but I think that there's like a void filling for sadness, or, just like you hear like a lot of times like people have a thing with they're sad, so they go shopping. Right. And then that buying that one item makes them feel better or something, but they haven't changed anything about what was making them sad, or they actually didn't address the thing that was going on. They just went out and did something that made them feel better, and then they can forget about it for a little bit longer until they're sad again, and then they can go buy something else or
I think that
what have you.
Maybe one of the key words here is compensation.
Yeah.
They're compensating for something.
Right.
And so being fanatical, I used to think being fanatical was healthy.
And like honorable or something.
Yeah. And so I've had many collections in my day. I used to collect Hot Wheels. I used to collect rocks. I used to collect Pogs. I used to collect cards.
I
used to collect comic books. I used to collect video games. I used to collect Pez. I used to collect music.
Yep.
And after a while, or, during that time, I always thought, I'm like, oh, well, you're just a collector sort of guy. And it's just cool to have collections. And, but I think you're right. I think you are essentially sort of filling the void. And I think you're kind of using it as a substitute for, I guess it would be like happiness or spiritual sort of contentment or something like that. You know? And so you actually realize that you're trying to make up for something else, but just because you have an extra Pez dispenser or you bought that new video game or whatever, it doesn't mean that, it doesn't equate happiness. And I've seen videos of people online who have sold their collections, huge collections worth like hundreds of thousands of dollars of like different things, and people just kind of getting to the point of realizing like, man, I thought I was getting into it for one reason or another, and then I realized that actually this stuff is all weighing me down.
Right.
That actually it's not, and I wouldn't say every person who has a collection is like this, but if you let it kind of go unchecked, I think a lot of people, perhaps this is the case or whatever, that you're kind of building your own sort of like, I don't know, it's almost like you're building a prison, kind of brick by brick sort of thing.
Well, it weighs you down. It's just like, how many times do you see hoard, like, the emotional baggage that comes with like a hoard?
Yeah.
It's usually symbolic of like a deep emotional pain.
Yes.
That is unresolved. And most everybody who's seen the show Hoarders, but like a homeless camp, these people just collect and they collect and they collect and they collect. And there's probably all sorts of reasons why they do it, but in their own mind, but I don't know. I always wonder about that stuff. And I think a lot of this kind of stuff goes into this because, like I said, I didn't get into the Beatles until I started collecting vinyl records. That was the thing that got me into the Beatles.
Right.
And, you and I both, we sold our record collection years ago, and when we sold it, I remember even being like, if I would have asked myself 5 years ago if I would ever sell my records, I would say you're nuts. I'll never sell these records. I'll have them forever. But then after all the years of doing all this types of research and finding out about these bands and culture creation and everything else, and then starting to question, is like, whose lyrics am I singing? What am I even singing about?
Right.
Who wrote these lyrics?
Right.
What does it all actually really mean? And, is that healthy?
Right.
And there's this whole thing about it. It's just really interesting, but never would I ever have thought that I'd be able to let go of something like that. But the liberation that came was quite astounding.
Right.
I would say.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
And so anyway, kind of a tangent, but
No. I was just going to say though, it's one of those things where the people who can't give up the collection, they think it's impossible to be able to live without it.
right.
And here we are all of these years later, just fine.
Yeah.
You didn't need that collection of whatever, the same way I didn't need all of these other collections of whatever the fuck,
Right.
But yeah, when you're in it though, the meaning behind it, it's so much stronger.
It really
but
is.
I think that it's a substitution though.
Yeah.
It's kind of like a simulation sort of thing, where it's just like, no,
Yeah.
this is just a product. That's the other thing too, is that the people who have these collections, they're so emotional about the collection, but a lot of times the people who are making the thing that people collect, it's just business.
right.
Baseball cards are just business. Comic books, it's just business. Even fancy cars, it's just business.
Right.
You know what I mean? Or whatever it might be. These albums and stuff for these labels, it's just business. And so you have an emotional resonance with it, but the people who are creating it have a different opinion about what it actually is. It's a product.
Right.
And they're happy that you're collecting 1 million Hot Wheels or whatever. So anyway, yeah, it's an interesting topic. We've talked about this
we
a
have.
lot privately. And
Yeah.
I can see it when I see people who are hardcore collectors with something. I can kind of see the tinge of, the longing
Yeah.
for something else.
There's nostalgia.
Yeah.
It's nostalgia programming, I think, and I can admit to that for sure, of having had fallen into that, and still have to kind of like grab myself out of it every once in a while. But I know that was a thing for me.
Yeah.
Was a lot of it was so much of a nostalgic, and most of my collection was always music based, because I really didn't collect many other things. I've never been a person that's had a lot of stuff around,
Right.
really, and so anyway, it's just interesting, but
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Totally.
Makes sense.
So just saying, I can't paint with a broad stroke here and say that all people who have
no.
any kind of collection, they're definitely like this or definitely like that or
Right.
whatever. But just say that it's a pattern that I've noticed with people. And the reason why I can notice it in other people is because I can acknowledge it within myself,
right,
because I was there,
right,
thinking that it was going to make me happy or something like that,
right.
But let's what do you think? Check the chat a little bit, and then I can get on to some other topics related to everything that
Sure.
I have in my notes.
Yeah, and then I've got some Manson connections too. So
Yes, that's a good one. Okay, cool. What's up, guys? So I can't remember where I left off, so I'm just going to pick a random place here.
that's probably about right.
So Cheney's saying, yeah, they were all MI6. So this is back when we were talking about Jimmy Savile. Okay. Let's see here.
Yeah, the stuff with Manson actually is a lot of the stuff is like what the mainstream says, but I have some other alternative thoughts.
Nice.
Yeah.
So I like this comment. Cheney's saying, pay the piper, give them your children. Literally the world we live in.
Yeah, it is.
Okay, so Josh was saying that one version of the story, which there's several, The piper left but came back as a green-colored man and lured the children away while the parents were in church, I think. Interesting.
Huh. What I wonder is what the green would be symbolic of. I mean, I think of envy, but
I mean, definitely. I think the like green man. So it's like a a nature man.
Okay,
leading
gotcha.
them to the woods or the forest or nature. So Moonlander Tattoo Dave says another suspected surname of Billy Shears is Shepherd. Nice. There you go. Yeah, the Shepherd angle is really fascinating. I heard years ago that Pied Piper was a metaphor to explain an actual event in reduction in population for Hamlin. Another hinted at child abduction. Yeah, exactly. There's a whole historical thread here where there's evidence to suggest that this was somehow a real event. And so I think that the jury's out. Nobody really knows what actually happened, but there is some historical record that this event actually occurred in some way, shape, or form. So it could be a metaphor for some sort of child abduction sort of crisis or whatever. What's up, my Cherie? How you doing?
There. Good to see you.
And everyone else who's new and joining us.
Oh man, I hope I don't know, my Sherry, if you have any family in Maui, but those fires.
Oh right.
That's a whole rabbit hole. My
oh
God.
my gosh, yeah. It's the same old, same old. I can't believe it.
Yeah, it's pretty bad.
Okay, so Cheney saying Ringo fell into a coma and spent a year away from his family at Liverpool's Myrtle Street Children's Hospital. Weren't you all just saying Jimmy Savile? Yeah, exactly. Interesting. I didn't know that. Ringo fell into a coma, huh? I wonder what happened. Yeah, Yoko Ono's, that's a whole nother thing. I wasn't even prepared to talk about Yoko Ono, but Yoko Ono is a witch. Her chanting is so off-putting. It must scare the shit out of spirits. Good stuff, guys. Yeah, regarding hoarding, Elliot James says, you never know when you'll need a pea-soaked stack of newspapers.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, Slick Dissident coming through with some wordplay stuff. Tupac kaput.
Ah, interesting.
Yeah.
That's a good one.
Yeah, I think so too. All right. Okay, so Cheney saying Beatles, Kennedy elected 1960 with the Beatles was set to be released that same day. Kennedy was shot. JFK was shot at 12:30 p.m. in Dallas. Beatles took the stage in Stockton Globe Cinema, England. Oh, interesting. 30 minutes later, she says right here. All right.
Lots of good comments. Thanks, guys.
Yeah, for sure. That's what I was looking forward to doing this one too, to see what you guys had to say about everything. Oh, okay. My Cherie saying the only island I don't have family on, actually. Never been.
Well, that's good. Glad to hear it.
Right on. Nice, guys. Sweet, sweet. So, Manson.
Nice. Yeah. I know you have, if you wanted to finish up with whatever you were rolling on too.
What was I even rolling on? I seriously can't remember.
The Pied Piper was the last thing you were talking about.
Oh, yeah. No, I'm good.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Manson, this is a good one. There's interesting stuff here.
Well, yeah, it is interesting because, in the mainstream Manson story, it is that the Beatles are said to have been talking to Manson and the family, and that's what, like, the prosecution, Vincent Bugliosi, pushes big time. So,
that was actually said in court?
Yes, like,
wow.
That is a thing that the Beatles were talking to us through the White Album, and it was the thing. And then everyone knows that they wrote Helter Skelter at the La Bianca house. They wrote Rise, which was a reference to the song Blackbird.
And they wrote it how?
They misspelled Helter Skelter at
I know, but like set the scene for people.
Oh, okay. So at the La Bianca murders, so those were the ones that took place the day after the Tate murders. Mm-hmm. They wrote it on the refrigerator, if I remember correctly, and it's in blood. and they misspelled it. So they spelled it Heater, and there's no A.
Heal.
Oh yeah, sorry, L.
Healter. They tried to write helter skelter
Right.
in blood at this murder scene.
Right.
But they actually wrote Helter Skelter.
Yes.
Right.
Right. So that was a big thing about it.
So what did Helter Skelter mean to them?
Well, supposedly the story is that it meant a race war was coming, and that Manson was convinced that the black people were going to rise up and they were going to kill everybody, like everybody, specifically the white man. And Manson wanted to take his family to the desert, and they had supposedly a thing called the bottomless pit that there was like a cave or something that they designated that they were going to go underground. They were going to wait for the race war to end. They were going to come up from the underground and then procreate a new race.
Right.
That's the mainstream story of it. Now, I'll say that I think that there's some sketchy stuff with this, and I think that authors like Tim O'Neill with the book Chaos, also Neil Sanders, The Only Thing That's Real Is Now, and then this book that I'm reading now, which is Lynette Fromm, who was one of the members. The cover's really not that good, but it's a pretty good book. And she talks about this specifically with the Beatles. And she says she does remember when the White Album came out. And the reason she remembers that when it came out is because the Beatles were such a big freaking thing. Like we're talking about, everybody loved the Beatles. So when the White Album came out, she does say that they were like listening to it. They were actively listening to the White Album. And, but what she does say, I just wanted to read a little excerpt from this because she talks about how, yeah, we listened to it, but by no means were we thinking that they were speaking to us. That is a totally fabricated thing. And, you know, I know with all this stuff, it's like, what do you believe? Who do you believe? These people are potential murderers. They're this, they're that. But I think that a lot of the satanic, fabulous, weird shit like this was made up by
Satanic Panic.
Yeah, by the prosecution to make it really look like Manson was this cult leader that had satanic holds over these kids and put spells on them to do these murders.
I have a quick question.
Yeah, go for it.
Regarding the court stuff.
Okay.
Do you have any understanding of how often they were talking about this stuff, like on the news and like in the papers and stuff? Because, you know, there's some trials where it's like a day by day thing and they're giving you like nightly updates or whatever.
Yeah.
Do you know if it was like that or not?
Well, if I remember correctly, and I think Manson even talks about this, I'm pretty sure the Manson trial was one of the first like trials that was ever aired on the television.
Oh, shit.
If I remember right.
Right.
Don't 100% quote me, but
I could see that.
I'm pretty sure that's the deal. And Manson was refused razors, you know, he wasn't able to shave. They wanted him to look like he was out of his mind.
Right.
He was probably dosed with stuff during the court hearings as well to make him seem a certain way. But yeah, if I remember right, that was the deal. And so there were headlines and articles and there was, you know, people putting stuff out and then the story changed and then they would write another article. And
the reason why I ask is because I wonder if, you know, the whole thing is all publicity is good publicity, right?
Yeah.
And so it makes me wonder, like, were they talking about the Beatles and Manson in the nightly news and stuff?
Oh, right.
Like if that was something that was made public or not.
That's a good question. It probably was because it did come up in court so often. Like that was what they wanted them to think. And so this is Lynette Fromm. So Lynette Squeaky Fromm, some might know that's her nickname. But she's talking about how they were also making connections to the White Album and the Bible because there was the whole Revelation thing. And so she talks about how they didn't have a Bible, but when the White Album came out, they got a Bible.
Oh, really?
And so that was kind of interesting what I thought. So she's just saying the new Beatles White Album was as appealing as their others, but also different, with specific sounds between songs, and the same sounds gathered in the piece called Revolution 9. Most interestingly were the sounds of gunfire, the grunts of pigs, the screams and moans of people dying, of people making love, a baby's babble, a black man yelling rise. The album was timely. We believed that the song Blackbird was written for the black race. We chuckled on hearing Sexy Sadie and wept with George Harrison's guitar. We acknowledged the genius that had created the album, but we did not believe that the Beatles were talking to us unless you included us in the soul of the world. The album was just very interesting.
Huh.
So she does reference the White Album a couple more times, though, throughout this section of the book, because she talks about how, they had Sadie, Sexy Sadie, one of the main songs, and then Susan Atkins, who was one of the main murderers of this whole crew. And she was one of the most kind of out there. She was the most promiscuous, it seems, from all the things I've read about her. Just one that she was like the biggest wild card that people never really took seriously, kind of thing, Anyway, so I thought that was very interesting. And it was kind of interesting that this was the section of the book that I'm coming up on, and then we decided we were going to do the Beatles because it just felt very timely that was going on. So there's also during this time now, anyone who's followed the Manson stuff, they were living at the Spawn Ranch, which was outside of LA, and then they got kicked off of the ranch by the owner. And they did, but while some of them still lived on the ranch, so excuse me, that one of the members of the family, one of the kids, one of the girls, her family had an old cabin in what they called Barker's Ranch, because their last name was Barker. And this ranch was in between LA and Vegas. And it was called Goler Wash. That was the area. But it was like off the beaten path. Like, it wasn't on a main road. It was a hard ass journey to get there. Like, nobody would go there basically unless you knew that it was there.
Right.
And so any books talk about how big of a chore it was to get there.
It was the deep desert.
It was the deep desert. And Lynette Fromm talks about when they were in the desert, there was something going on with Charlie, like something flipped. And he did start talking about the impending race war, thinking that there was something that was going to go on. So during this time, they started preparing for like an apocalyptic event. And I think what the prosecution of this whole case did was they twisted that story. So they were thinking that something was going on. Something was going on in Charlie with the desert. We've been talking about the desert and how like it's kind of this like abyss place.
Yeah, it's a place of mysticism and transformation and stuff like that.
Yeah, and so then they're out there in the middle of it, and there's like nothing around except for hot sand, rocks. They're living with no amenities. They're barely eating anything.
You said that there was a water issue.
There was a water issue, so like Charlie would go out and get water, and like she describes on one of the occasions, like he almost died because he couldn't find. It took him a long time to find it, and anyway, so there's all these weird accounts like that. But at this time, when the Beatles album came out, they had then gotten kicked out of the Spawn Ranch. Then they were all living at the Barker Ranch in the desert. But then what they did, they were just squatters. So they would go into LA and they would find a house that was abandoned and they would just live in it until they got kicked out. So there was a point where they were split up a little bit. Some of them stayed in the desert, and then some of them went to Benedict Canyon in LA, and they were living in this house that was abandoned for a while. And this is the time when the biker gangs started kind of coming into the scene too. So you have the Beatles album coming out, then you have the biker gangs all of a sudden infiltrating. You have Charlie kind of having some kind of a switch, which I think he was programmed by Scientology. And I think there's multiple accounts in this book about her noticing something happens to him, he flips. And he flipped at one point when his parole officer allowed him and two of the other girls to go visit a former Scientologist that he knew from prison in Washington State. And after they do that, she describes a situation where something flipped in him. And so
Wow.
there was something going on with that interaction. And so anyway, who knows what programs were put into him. And so the Beatles could have been a program. They could have known that this was going to be used.
Right.
It's just a total speculation. But to have the Beatles and then the biker gangs all come in all at once with this crew, and they were more segregated and split up, than all the times that they were living together. And then after this happened, they got kicked out of the house in Benedict Canyon, and then they got invited back to the Spawn Ranch. And then that's when stuff started getting extra weird.
Right.
Where there was the biker people started moving in, and there was like an actual people that were living there and whatever. So anyway, just wanted to bring that up. Because it's an interesting little weave with the Beatles.
Totally. So to me, it's interesting that he thought a race war was going to happen, and that he was going to basically not participate until everyone killed each other.
Yeah.
Because we know that the race war card, has been something they have wanted for like a long time, and that it seems like there's always a push for some sort of race war kind of thing, right? And that's kind of like I almost feel like it's like an evolution of the Civil War or something like that, in a way. And it hasn't happened. There's been instances, obviously, where things kind of pop off or whatever, but that's just kind of like it's almost like a tired narrative or something, where I almost feel like it's too late now for something like that to happen.
Yeah,
I could be wrong, but so that's just kind of a curious thing that's how he interpreted it. From an album called The White Album.
You're right.
As well. And then there's a song called Blackbird, right? I think of a bird that's caged or something like that.
Yeah.
And the song lyrically is about the bird being free, right?
Yeah.
So there's all of that. And then kind of like what you said, just going to mention it here because it's been on my mind for a little while now. But the idea of the desert is like what you said. It's crossing the desert is symbolic of crossing the abyss. And so I don't know if I mentioned this like last week or recently or something, or maybe it was just to you, but crossing the desert, I think in Western occultism has been used as a metaphor for going to the other side. And so Crowley did rituals in the desert. The other occultists have done things in the desert like that. And even in the Kabbalistic Tree of Life, I don't know what Sephiroth it is, but it's in the upper portion of the tree. But crossing from one Sephiroth to the other has been referred to as crossing the abyss. And that you cross the abyss symbolically with a camel, which is what you would use in a desert setting if you were going to cross the desert.
Right.
Right. And so that's associated with the High Priestess card, which in the Crowley deck, you can see a camel down below, because it's associated with the camel. And then she is symbolically like a gateway. She's usually between two pillars. And so she's like this middle way. So she is kind of symbolically like she is the doorway that you cross or pass through or whatever. And woman obviously is a doorway portal to this reality, right? That's how we all come here.
Right.
And so it just makes me wonder what I asked the other night when you were telling me this stuff. If there was if there was an esoteric angle to Charles Manson wanting to be in the desert,
right?
That if it was there some sort of ritualistic angle, or was there some sort of spiritual sort of thing? Why was he driven to go out to the desert that is super dangerous, where you don't have, water readily available and all this other type of stuff? And it's not like it's not like he knows his way out there.
I don't think so. I think that he just had the way that he's described in some of these books is that he just had a confidence to him. he had a confidence, and that was I think one of the things that got him as far as it did with all these people and luring people in and wanting to hang and
Right.
doing all these things. And I think he also had the philosophy of like, well, it'll all just be taken care of, so we don't have to worry about anything.
Right.
Things will be provided, which is true. I mean, that's how the universe does typically work,
He had faith.
He had faith. And so I think it was more that, but knowing the type of thinker he was, because when you listen to some of his speeches, sometimes he sounds wackadoo, but when you read between the lines, it's like, damn, he's actually very intelligent. And he has quite a bit of interesting things to say.
Oh, yeah.
And he has, kind of a interesting way of looking at life. And I would say interesting in more of a good way. But I'm not saying that he was like the bee's knees or something. But, I think that he was just painted as this man who didn't know what was going on. And he was just straight up crazy. But some of the quotes you read of his is like, wait, what? That makes a lot of fucking sense.
Yeah,
and that's actually how it works. And, whatever.
Yeah.
So
he knows a thing or two. He's been around the block.
Yeah.
He's impressed me with some of his like philosophical sort of insights or whatever you might want to say.
Yeah.
Where I'm just kind of like, oh, dang, that's actually very insightful.
Yeah.
But he looks crazy, and then a lot of times too, when we've seen it, the interviewer just paints him as being crazy. And they don't understand. They can't read between the lines with what he's saying.
Right.
And
they're probably so freaked out anyway by him and, whatever, that they just
totally
disregard him and all that stuff.
Totally. That's a good one.
Yeah.
I mean, the Beatles Manson sort of connection, that's interesting. So let me check out my notes here and make sure I got to everything. I think I did, actually, to be honest. I think you all get the idea. Michael Jackson owning the
oh, that's right.
What is it? The copyright or the gold records, or how would you say it?
I thought he ended up owning the songs.
Yeah.
Somehow, or he bought the collection, or
right.
something like that.
Right. So that's interesting. I mean, there's some other little details here. Oh, well, one of the things I will mention is that one of the things, basically, okay, there's two things here that I want to talk about. We were talking about the shepherd symbolism. Someone asked Paul McCartney, hey, so now that you're knighted, or when you got knighted, are there any things that you're allowed to do, or what are the perks of being a knight, basically? And he said that, and who knows if he already knew this or if this is legitimately the case. He said, well, my daughter wondered the same thing. And so she actually looked it up. And she said that because I'm knighted, I actually have a free license, essentially, to take his flock of sheep his herd of sheep through London. And that only people of a certain stature or class can actually do that. So common people, normal people cannot do that. That is illegal.
Right.
Right? If you're knighted, you can do that. And so I'm like, damn, what the hell? I'm like, dude, that is crazy. Given the shepherd herding symbolism and stuff like that.
Right.
That he's actually legally, in the eyes of the crown, allowed to take his sheep through the city of London.
Yeah, that's so wacky.
Isn't that...
Yeah,
it's one of those
very symbolic.
Yeah, it's one of those old school sort of things that they've probably had. It's probably been around for like hundreds of years or whatever. But to me, that's super fascinating. So I was like, whoa, well, that's another thing added to the shepherd business.
Huh.
And then the other thing that I'll mention is that George Harrison was at some point, he basically said something along the lines of, wait, who freaking is still alive? Obviously, Lennon died. Obviously,
Ringo
and Paul. So then why am I thinking it's George? Basically, at some point, he's basically acknowledged that that the original Paul died. He there are certain things that he's said when he's like accepting an award and everything else that he essentially alluded to the fact that he's one of the last remaining Beatles or something like that. Okay. And it kind of like doesn't make sense. We're just like, well, what are you talking about? Because there's still Ringo, and then there was still Paul. Mm-hmm. And so people have wondered if he was somehow, talking about the original Paul or something like that. I only saw a brief clip of it, but now I'm getting confused in my mind.
Well, I was going to say, because he would be, when he was alive, he would have been.
But there would have been Paul, and then there would have been Ringo.
Right. So he's one of the last.
Right. So now it doesn't. Now in my mind, because literally what I remember seeing in the video of him saying that like it's great to be like the last member or something like that.
Oh,
and it like doesn't even make sense, kind of given all this stuff. And I don't know what year this was or whatever. And it definitely was not Ringo, because he's just.
Yeah, you can tell. It's Ringo.
He has a look.
Yeah, he does.
You know, but so now I'm confused. I might just have to revisit that.
Okay, yeah.
Video footage, because I'm kind of getting it all twisted.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't be surprised that there'd be something going on.
Cool. All right. So it looks like there's a Telegram here. I'm going to check the chat real quick, and then we will play that.
Cool.
Okay. So just reading these, seeing which ones are appropriate to discuss and talk about. Oh, interesting. Manson. They added the extra lines to make the swastika on his head. That's kind of curious. I did not know that. I might have to take a closer look at that, actually. Yes, there's stuff related to Lennon's death.
Yeah, because I think it was just an X. Because all the other girls had an X. And I think like that was one of the things that they did.
So Cheney's saying Manson was a Berkeley experiment. He was the fall guy for the Tate murder. He took the baby from her belly. Polanski had to have had connections to the Playboy tunnels like Kane Nicholson and Beatty. Hollywood is attached by tunnels.
Yes, that's true.
Good stuff. And let's see here. All right. Biker gangs, Hunter S. Thompson, Adrenochrome, all touring bands were just snuggling humans. The screaming smuggling. The screaming girls hid actual screaming girls being trafficked. Oh, that's interesting.
Oh,
Holy
whoa.
shit. That's a very curious thought.
Damn, that's dark.
Huh. I wasn't aware of this. How interesting, Cheney. Chris was just telling me about the band Skrillex, or the artist Skrillex, the DJ, and how they are connected to songs about child trafficking, and also the parents were Scientology founders. Oh, interesting. I didn't know that about Skrillex.
Huh.
Is that legit? Skrillex is a Corey Feldman relative? Because they actually look very similar. I don't know if that's a joke or not, but that's what Isle Shop's lab is saying.
Huh.
All right.
Yeah, Corey Feldman, man. Weird. He makes me sad.
And then Magi is saying that Crowley was a degenerate and to hang on to his tarot cards is demonic. So I am demonic, apparently. Okay. Okay, yep. Check your Telegram. We will do that right now.
Do you have your phone in here? Or do we have to get it?
Yeah, I have it right here.
Okay.
So let me just read this by Katrina real fast. If Beatles, if they were part of a CIA psyop for culture creation, then how or where did we see their music influence world politics or other movements at the time? I mean, you're seeing it in how culture is right now, you know. So that's kind of the whole point of almost kind of like the Summer Love thing. It's just like the many ways in which culture has kind of like changed over the decade, and you know, the introduction of different drugs and new ways of looking at the world and stuff like that. I would say like the destruction of the nuclear family, the rise in feminism, liberalism, kind of a weaponized sort of liberal sort of outlook on things, you know, stuff like that.
Yeah.
So you're living in it. You're living in the result of all of this, I would say. Okay. Right. Oh, Liam. Yeah, it's because we're actually streaming to two places. So we're streaming to my channel and then Michelle's channel as well. Okay. So I am checking the Telegram.
Okay. So we got Flat Earth Hippie. Excited to hear what Hank has to say. Because I know Hank has a story about Lynette Fromm, and I have yet to call him about it. But as I've been reading this book, I always think of him because I'm like, I'm reading this book and I'm like, man, I think the thing about it is that it's a good book. She shares a lot of stuff, but she leaves out like details where she'll say something and I'm like, how? And then she just ends the chapter. And I'm like, wait, how is there not more to be said right now? There has to be more details. And I get the sense that she's just saying enough and then whatever. So it's interesting, but kind of frustrating. But at the same time, it's like par for the course when you jump into these rabbit holes that, who knows who wrote this book? Did she really write it? She probably did. I don't know. But anyway.
So our slow internet. Okay. We got it. So I think there's a couple of clips here. So one from the branch and then 16 seconds long. And then we've also got one from Hanky Panky over here.
Okay.
So here we go. Let me make sure actually the speed is correct and not quite yet.
All right.
So this is Joshua the Branch.
She loves you, yeah, yeah, yeah. She loves you, yeah, yeah, yeah. With a love like that, you know you should be glad. Woo!
Nice. Thank you for that.
I deserve that because I've complimented him on his singing ability before.
Yes, he does have a nice voice.
He does. So I don't know if it came through here necessarily, but we've heard other stuff by him. Okay, so here's Hank. So he just said, hey, guys. And then, we'll see what else he has to say here. So I'm not going to rewind it.
Thought I'd relate a quick story my brother told me back in the 70s about Squeaky Lynette Fromm. He was living in a rural area in the Mojave Desert out there toward Apple Valley, and one morning the FBI came knocking on his door, and he was living there with his two buddies. They were, 17, 18 years old, and the FBI needed to have a look around their place, and so they looked around there and evidently, according to the FBI, found footprints that matched the footprints of the house about a mile down the road where an elderly couple lived, and allegedly, according to them, Squeaky Fromm and her little gang murdered that elderly couple and took their car. Evidently, they'd been outside the windows of my brother's place the night before, kind of sizing them up, and there were three dudes in there, so they moved on down the road, I guess, because they thought didn't want to, try and take them on. But anyway, this is a secondhand story, and the FBI is involved, but that was the story, and so I just thought I'd share that with the community. Well, talk to you later. Bye.
Thank you, Hank.
Thank you, Hank. I have been wanting to hear that story, and I know you alluded to it in the chat a handful of weeks ago, but yeah, no, that's interesting because I know with Lynette Fromm, she was one that she did branch off, and she was kind of known as kind of circling in darker occult circles or doing rituals and things like that. There's a lot of photos of her in, not saying if you wear a dark black cape or something, you're doing weird things. You can wear whatever you want. But the way that I've seen her in photos and heard stories about post all this stuff, once people went to jail and everything, she kind of carried on with certain things. So I don't know. I guess I wouldn't be surprised, maybe. She also, I'm pretty sure, did jail time. I'm not sure. I don't remember for what, but I'm pretty sure she went to jail.
So how much further do you have?
I have about
wow. Not too much.
Yeah, not too much. I mean, I don't know, maybe a quarter. Less than a quarter?
I think less than a quarter, yeah.
Yeah, definitely less than a quarter. So I've actually flown through this book because it's pretty good.
Where does it rank for people who maybe are interested in reading some of this stuff?
On a scale from 1 to 10, I would say it's about a 5 or a 6.
Okay.
I'd say more of a 6. If you like hearing the personal perspective, if you like that versus, the research heavy sort of stuff, and I like both, but I do always love to hear people's personal accounts.
Yeah, yeah.
So it's written from her point of view of like how she met Charlie and like before they became a big crew of people. It was just her, Charlie, and another woman. And so they did a lot of traveling together. So she kind of just goes into more detail of just how Charlie was and how they were and a lot of the sexual stuff actually and the control that came along with that and the vulnerability and her insecurities and how she can see how she was kind of pulled into him and stuff like that. So a lot of that kind of stuff is in there. And this book was recommended by a few other podcasters who are more onto this sort of side of Manson, of questioning it. And they said like her book out of all of the family members who've put books out seems to be the most accurate and like most close to a lot of the alternative stories.
Gotcha.
Which I would say is pretty
agree.
spot on. So
Yeah.
it's pretty good.
Nice.
Yeah.
Well, what do you say we check the chat one last time
Sure.
and then
Mosey on out.
get out of here?
Yeah.
This has been fun though, guys.
Yeah.
So-
Thanks for hanging. And if we triggered any Beatles fans out there, I know it happens.
I would say definitely do your own research.
Yeah, yeah.
I don't know how my sort of relay came across or whatever.
I thought it was good.
But there's a lot
I think
more to pull at with everything.
I think you hit on a lot of the main things that come through.
Right. Well, I'm glad. So I think Jashin, you've posted this a couple times, but I'll read it. X. In Paleo Hebrew, the letter was in the form of a cross or an X, and so used for one making a mark or a signature. Yeah, totally. So related to the X on the forehead, I'm assuming. So yeah, you're saying it's like a calling card. It's all good, Magi. No worries at all. Everyone's entitled to their own opinion about everything. The I in Tavistock is I sounds the same as the letter I if you replace the O, the letter I, which hidden meaning is a symbol of an I in Phoenician time, inspired by the Egyptian hieroglyph, etc., etc. He's getting to Tav-istock, Tav-I-stock. Yeah, no worries with the typos. Gotcha. Cool. Sweet guys. Well, once again, thank you to our patrons, including all of these fine folks.
Yes, thank you so much. Thank you, Chance. Did we already name them? I think we did.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
you guys are all up on the screen. We named you already, but I can do it one more time just for good measure. Chance, Binaboo, Sarah G, Liam, Shrimp Anderson, Amy Messner, Miriam Hank, Jenny G, Erica Rodriguez, Moonlander Spoons, Mary, Catherine, Logan Cook, Lily Vine, Debbie, Natasha, Mary Beth Sanchez, Nikasa, Stephanie, and Jennifer. Thank you as always. We really, really appreciate it.
Woo! Once again, patreon.com/thehealinghome. Next week, you're doing a solo show.
I am. Solo show on the 15th of this month. So next week, Tuesday.
Do you care to talk about the sort of theme here?
Yeah, sure. So, I've mentioned it a couple times, but I had started getting something was going on with my ear back when we went on our travels to Fresno. And when we came back, I just came down with this gnarly ear infection, something that I've never quite experienced as an adult. I've definitely had my share of ear infections. But, this was a doozy, and I'm still at the tail end. I'm still not in the total clear, I would say. But what I want to do for my solo show next week is talk about the experience and talk about some of the things that I did to help myself, what the process looked like, and just kind of being humbled by being sick, I guess you could say, and I don't even like saying sick. It's just like having the challenge of going through something that literally just takes you out of the game and you can't do anything because your body is like, no.
Right.
And so just talking about that and some of the things that I think could be helpful for somebody else if they were to unfortunately experience something like that. So
yeah.
So anyway,
you learned a lot.
I did. I did learn a lot. I'm still learning a lot. And a biggest takeaway was that I've learned a lot about myself, which typically happens when we go through these challenging times like that. So I wanted to talk to everybody about it. If you're interested in hearing about it, come hang out on Tuesday.
Nice. And then your next Full Moon Offerings newsletter is coming out on the 30th.
Yes.
For those of you guys who don't know, she has a current offering of mugwort tincture.
Yes, and I only have 2 bottles left. So if you're interested, hit me up. Because mugwort, when I put it out there, usually goes pretty quick.
That's true. I've noticed that too.
Yeah.
Right on. And then these are your other offerings at the moment.
Yep. And I do still have 2 of the mugwort tincture and anointing oil sets, which is a lovely combo if you're wanting to really bump up the dream stuff. Check that out and let me know if you want to get anything else that you see up on the screen.
Nice. And then you can do so by contacting Michelle at michelleshealinghome@gmail.com, or you can go to michelleshealinghome.com. Alternatively, you can call or text her at 503-568-1569. And then this is just a little reminder that I'm going to be talking to Ben Balderson about the periodic table of elements tomorrow.
Woo!
And I did a show with Longo on Old World Florida about the elements. It's kind of interesting. There's a few people who kind of came out and said, they liked it, or they have things to contribute, or did you consider this or that or whatever. And Ben was one of those people. And so he is like a lab alchemist. So he's very hands-on with a lot of compounds and elements and stuff like that. So curious to hear his hands-on take about all of this.
What time are you doing that?
I don't think we've settled on a time, but I'm pretty sure it's going to be probably around 5 or 6 or something.
Okay.
And then also we did a Vibrant last night about the herbs of Leo. It was a good time. So
yes.
We were with Kyle from Tippy Canoe Herbs. We were with Slick, who's in the chat right now. And of course we were with Chance as well. And we got into it. And so it was over 3 hours, I think. It was
a long one.
So you can check that out on my channel, Michelle's channel, Interverse. So give that a go if you're interested. And then you just had a conversation with Ingrid Kincaid, the Rune Woman, on Tuesday. We had a conversation, but there was a lot of technical issues, so I was only there kind of part of the time.
Yeah, there were technical issues, but all in all, it was a great combo. We love Ingrid. I really enjoy her and her perspective on things. So if you're into the runes and if you want to learn a little bit more of a different perspective and you want to hear from an elder who's been working with them for a really long time, she's quite the force. She really she inspires me in many ways as like I look at her as I aspire to be how do I say it? As I grow older, I aspire to grow old as she has, where it's like she has a confidence about her that I think only comes with age sometimes.
Yeah.
And I think we can be confident at any age, don't get me wrong, but I think that there's just a confidence that comes with wisdom. And so she's just a person that I look up to in that respect, and really kind of I value her opinions on the runes.
And she's a local, and we've met her multiple times and stuff like that. So It's always, to me, really cool and interesting and fun to bring people into the mix who we actually like know in person. Yeah,
and it is nice, and it makes for a really good conversation too. There's good conversation when you don't know the person, haven't met them in person, but there's some extra resonance there that you can feel, I think.
Totally
coming through.
And she is a polar northern sister ally friend, or whatever you might want to say.
She definitely is.
Which are kind of rare. And so the fact that we can kind of throw down with that kind of stuff, I think is cool.
Yeah, it is cool, and she's totally into it. So if you're into the polar solar northern symbolism too, you'll like our conversation.
Indeed. And then for all my stuff, symbolicstudies.com. In case you guys don't know, I have a store now on my site, so you guys can book tarot readings and study sessions, and you can buy my study packet. You can buy my posters, things like that. It's all nice and convenient over there.
Yeah, and things are rolling in. It's really nice.
Yeah, totally. So, and then you can find all my other links there. So, symbolicstudies.com. And that'll do it, guys.
Yep. Thank you guys, as always, for tuning in and just being awesome and sharing what you guys know, too, and think.
For sure. All right. Much love, everybody. Until next time, take care.
Later.
Bye.
Thank you.